day, all the participants, all our friends. How are you? How have you been? It's a nice day in Taipei right now. We are very happy to see all of you on the screen. On behalf of WLFD ROC chapter, I want to thank you for your participation to the WLFD European Regional Organization Video Forum today and discuss on the theme of COVID-19 with its impact on freedom, democracy, and human rights. WLFD is in response to the raging pandemic has the first time decided to change the format of discussion from traditional forum to a video one. And by the meantime, WLFD invited His Excellency Ambassador Fabrizio Bozzuto, Ambassador of Sovereign Order Malta, to Nauru as a keynote speaker, and other discussants, including his Honorable Fischer, member of German Bundestag, Federal Parliament, Chairman of WFFD European Regional Organization, Honorable Daniel Mitov, former Bulgarian Foreign Minister, and independent consultant, Honorable Lord Dennis Rogan, Deputy Speaker House of Lords, United Kingdom, Honorable Diarmuid Wilson, Senator of Ireland, Stefano Ballecchi, an adjunct professor in sociology of Made in Italy, Spienza University, Rome, Italy. The WLFD also sincerely welcome all members and friends worldwide joining us to watch the video forum. In order to cope with the widespread COVID-19 virus, various means, heavy or light, to confine infection of the contagious diseases had almost been put in force by different countries all over the world. The confinement will also come along to limit of affected freedom, democracy, and human rights. Under the pressure of possible fatal epidemic and under a radical uncertainty, people are all unconscious, easy to accept, or to rationalize the inconvenient truth of these infringements, some temporary but others potentially permanent. They will certainly affect our way of life, define our new normal, if the virus persists somehow, somewhere in the world. Taiwan has acted as an anti-epidemic model with its population of 23 million, has reported fewer than 490 cases of COVID-19, with 70 deaths as today. It avoids painful and costly lockdown, but still moving quickly to impose travel restrictions, screen visitors, deploy protective gears such as compulsively wearing face masks, and using modern electronic gadgets to treat those who subject to at-home quarantine. All the preemptive strike and immediate response imposed by Taiwanese authority are relatively easy or minor, while some of the countries, for the reason of severe epidemic situation, implemented a strict lockdown of the whole city, then deeply affected its people's city life and civil rights. For instance, metropolitan and economy are an infinitely complicated web of interconnections. Everyone has a series of direct economic relationships as well as other activities, such as filling prescriptions, purchase merchandise, make money, and pay the mortgages. All of them do need a mutual expected behavior, and with mutual confidence, how to make this connection work together. The unnerving caused by lockdown will possibly make a pretext for setting up a negative precedent to freedom, democracy, and human rights. However, It is easily a dilemma for making decisions of the priority in between epidemic prevention and return on economic activity. To resuscitate our economies would rely heavily on expanded public health measures, including a huge increase in testing on mass scale, temperature checks, a system of tracking down and isolate the infected, etc. But unfortunately, just lifting restrictions does not guarantee a return to the way things were. Then it comes with the issues of effective and efficient governance, as well as support from the people. Just as Professor Francis Fukuyama earlier indicated, the issue sounds contradictory and impractical by categories as a responsibility for all leaders, whether to adapt to or create a dynamic balance. Again, thank you for your time and your interest and your participation. We all wish you good health and success. Now, I would like to invite Honorable President WFAD, Honorable Rao Yingqi, say a few words.
大家好，新冠肺炎现在还在全球流窜中。世盟为了抗疫，特别探讨对自由民主和人权的影响，以视讯的方式举行欧洲的区域组织论坛。对于各位贵宾的踊跃参与，本人要特别表示热忱的欢迎和感谢。
I welcome you to participate in this conference as the COVID-19 pandemic reached the whole world. For the epidemic prevention, WLFD at the first time is trying to change the forum from traditional form to a video one on the theme of COVID-19 and impact on freedom, democracy, and human rights, with the purposes to contribute its efforts on peace and the secure for all human beings.
大家都知道，新冠肺炎已经严重的危害到我们人类的生命和安全。世界各国都是积极采取防堵的措施来抗疫防疫，它也严重影响到我们的自由民主和人类人权的发展。我们台湾虽小，虽不是世界卫生组织的成员，但是在没有外援的支援之下，就致力以前瞻的作为、及早的戒备、资讯的共享、科技的合作、严密的组织、公开透明的团结全民抗疫防疫，因而赢得了成功，也为台湾自由民主和人权的发展树立了典范和贡献，广为世界各国的赞誉和借鉴。
According to the latest statistics, global COVID-19 infected goes over 6 million, and with a scaring death toll. In response to the seriousness development, most of the government adopted a series of public health measures, including testing on mass scale, temperature checks, cancel commercial flight, following a system of tracking down, and isolating the infected, even with lockdown our borders and cities. These strict measures will affect global development, freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law.
今天的视讯论坛，除了分享台湾抗疫防疫成功的经验，以及台湾在自由民主和人权的发展的成就，让大家有所收获之外，更重要的就是新冠肺炎的抗疫和防疫对人民的限制和强制，这是难免的。诸如封城、封市、封城市，硬性规定一定要佩戴口罩等等的强制措施，或许有侵害自由民主与人权。所以在这种不得已的情况之下，如何来捍卫自由民主和人权？本人相信各位的学养一定能够有把握正确的定位和方向。
It is my sincere expectation this forum will not only share the successful Taiwan experience of preventing and treating COVID-19, but let all distinguished discussants address the theme and exchange viewpoints for the future direction of the democracy development. Thanks for your time and participation. Wish you all good health and success.
谢谢大家，敬祝大家身体健康。本次的视讯论坛以顺利圆满成功，再见。
See you. Thank you very much again for your time and interest and your participation. Thank you. Now I think we are expecting an Honorable Zheng Yongquan, the President of WLFD ROC chapter, say a few words regarding address the issue. Dr. President Zheng, please.
世盟老总会长，德国国会议员，世盟欧洲区域组织的主席，德国分会会长惠雪先生，英国上议院副议长，世盟英国分会主席罗根先生，爱尔兰国会参议员威尔森先生，保加利亚前外长米托夫先生，马尔蒂骑士团驻诺鲁大使杜隐士先生，意大利罗马大学教授皮列吉先生，世界各地世盟的各位会员及爱好自由民主的朋友们，大家早安，大家好。
Good morning, good day. Honorable Yao Yingqi, President of WLFD. Honorable Fischer, Member of German Federal Parliament. President of WLFD European Regional Organization. President of WLFD German Chapter. Honorable Dennis Rogan, Deputy Speaker of British House of Lords. President of WLFD UK Chapter. Honorable Wilson Dermot Mewis, Senator of Ireland. Honorable Daniel Mitov, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria. His Excellency Bozato, Ambassador of Sovereign Order of Malta to the Republic of Nauru. Professor Pirati, University of Rome in Italy, all the chapter members of WLFD family and all freedom-loving friends.
非常欢迎大家拨冗参加世盟所举办的欧洲区域组织视讯论坛。我们都知道，世盟在早期以前是以反对共产侵略、谋求世界和平，而现在则以推动自由、民主、人权、凝聚普世价值为己任，共同谋求人类权益和福祉，盼能够有助于解决当前自由民主发展所面临一系列的问题。
We welcome to join the WLFD at the European Organization Video Conference. As you all are aware, WLFD was established to stop the aggression of communists, to pursue the development of world peace. Nowadays, it is dedicated to the aims of advocating freedom, democracy, and human rights, and to uphold the universal value, so to contribute to more interest and better standard of life for all people. With the general purposes of WLFD, we hope to solve a serious problem that face the development of freedom and democracy.
今天6月12日是新冠肺炎爆发半年了，疫情已经蔓延全世界，造成全球各地有672万4千多人确诊，39万4千多人的死亡，重大灾情之际，世界各国都因为新冠肺炎疫情的防治，不但对经济产生重大的影响，也对自由、民主与人权产生了冲击，甚至必须限制人民的行动自由或追踪接触权，以防疫情的扩散。因此，产业供给链中断，民众行动受损，各行业停工歇业，导致于全球经济停顿。我们世盟在这个时候举办视讯论坛，探讨疫情对自由、民主、人权的冲击，意义非常的重大。
Today, as of June 12, after the spread of coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic for almost 6 months, more than 6 million thousands people confirmed case, thousands of confirmed cases have been reported in the world, resulting more than 394,000 deaths. As a result of pandemic and in order to prevent it from getting worse, many countries and regions have restricted free movement and imposed contact tracing, quarantine, entry ban, or other restrictions such as curfews or stay-at-home orders, either for citizens, recent travelers, and to the affected area, or for all travelers. Accordingly, people are restricted to move freely. Most business is decreased, and most products, most produce and supply chain are forced to stop. All of this eventually has had a great negative impact, not only on the global economy, but on freedom, democracy, and human rights. Concerns have been raised over the harm to our freedom and democracy and human rights under the restriction of personal movement, free assembly, and business closures. Therefore, I think it is critical and meaningful for us, WLFD, to hold a forum to discuss the problem.
台湾在这一次的新冠肺炎防治领先世界各国，可以说是全球防疫体系中的模范生。据报载，今年台湾受到多达29国行政部门致函、推荐、回复咨询或媒体询问，都发表了声明及社团媒体等等， 多元方式的发表支持我国申请参加 WHA， 且受到60多国的媒体，共超过1800篇的报道，表达对我国的支持。在疫情稍缓之后，紧接而来的就是在未来生活经济的复苏。防疫前半场，台湾这次成为非常成功的将病毒阻止在境外。现在我们要走向疫情的后半段，如何复苏经济，对民众来说是相当迫切的问题。同时，疫情的爆发也显现了自由民主和人权的维护跟疫情有着微妙的关系，需要我们更细微的观察。
As the COVID-19 pandemic continued to ravage the globe, Taiwan has successfully prevented and contained it quickly to demonstrate that Taiwan has played a leading role in the defense of the stop pandemic. This approach, known as Taiwan model, has earned worldwide acclamation for outstanding work and likely become a best model for the world. As of May 15, according to a new report, up to 29 country administrations had expressed support for Taiwan who WHO bid in numerous ways, including letters, consultations, responses to parliament questions, and media inquiries, public statements, and social media posts. This year, Taiwan's bid to participate in WHO has not only gained the support from many government and political leaders, it has also been reported by the media of over 60 countries in more than 1,800 articles, commentaries, columns, and op-eds shows that strong international support for Taiwan cause. As the spread of pandemic is going down, now we immediately face another problem of how we are going to live in the future and how we are going to recover the economy. Taiwan has successfully won the first half game of the pandemic, containing the virus outside her border. Now, in the second half, it is a relatively pressing need for the government to do its best to get the economy recovered for these people's living. However, the breakout of the pandemic has consequently caused a subtle relation between the government quarantine restrictions and the safeguard of freedom, democracy, and human rights. It needs to be examined more carefully and practically.
自由、民主、人权，必须在法治的基础之下，才能够永续生存发展。唯有法治的政府权限才不会毫无限制，人民的权利才能受到法治的保障。政府的存在源于人民交付权力，代为执行社会企业。然而，在疫情蔓延的时候，情况可能转变，许多国家的权力回到一个人或少数人所控制，演变成专制的寡头的政权。表面上，国家仍然是面对着自由民主，但是在受到疫情剥夺的关键时刻，人们可能有两害取其轻，而忽略了基本人权，甚至的接受一些违反人权的措施，被迫合理化的接受抗议的大旗，认同集权或民粹的措施。
As we understand that the value of freedom, democracy, and human rights is sustainable under the rule of law, it is the rule of the law that restrains the power of the government from expanding without limitation. People's rights, therefore, will be fully and legally protected. The existence of government and is the product of the so-called social contract that agrees the power for the government is conferred by the people it governed. However, during the pandemic, the situation could be changed. The power of government could be transferred to only one man or to a small group of people that develop into despotism or oligarchy. It still looks like a democracy in its appearance. While the pandemic is serious, the people are inclined to avoid their fundamental rights of freedom, to follow the rules of government, to keep their lives safe. Sometimes it is even worse that the people are forced to justify themselves to knowledge and totalitarian or populism, to accept the rule of government that violate human rights under the big flag of saving people's lives from pandemic.
新冠肺炎疫情爆发，导致国际局势产生剧烈的变化。未来国际间乃需要透过多边主义，也就是国际合作，完成疫苗的研发和试验。但另一种观点认为，以往国际分工体系将濒临瓦解。新冠肺炎疫情使得各国关闭了边界，自己生产物资，不再依赖国际分工，可能走向单边主义、孤立主义和保护主义。疫情爆发至今，国际旧秩序形同瓦解，新的秩序有待建立。随着威权主义的升高，自由、民主、人权的价值可能受损。疫情的不确定，也增加了国际冲突的可能。有些国家为了转移疫情的负面情绪，而寻找卸责的对象，加深了国际冲突。目前已进入了后疫情的时代，疫苗仍未开发，疫情如果持续的蔓延，将使政局持续的不稳定。新冠肺炎的疫情不是一时的冲动，更可能长远的对人的自由产生结构性的影响，而这个影响可能颠覆了西方社会所坚持的自由民主的价值。
After the breakout of coronavirus pandemic, the international community has become uncertain and unstable. As the pandemic is still ravaging the globe, it is necessary for the whole world to develop the vaccines through the international cooperation. However, on the other hand, another point of view has been reached over the international cooperations. Some believe that all world system of international cooperation or multilateralism is going to break down due to the pandemic, cause more countries to choose unilateralism, isolationism, and protectionism, to close the border or self-produce their own products and to become isolated from the world. So far, the order of the world seems to have collapsed, while the new one has not been established yet. As authoritarianism is underway to demand the people to comply with restriction of the pandemic, the value of freedom, democracy, and human rights could be in jeopardy. The uncertainty of the pandemic also increased the possibility of international conflicts. Some certain countries seek a scapegoat to blame for to transfer the negative feeling of the people, causing more conflict of international community. As the second half of the pandemic has arrived, the vaccine has not been well developed. The unfinished spread of the pandemic will exacerbate the uncertainty and the political and economic situation around the world. The coronavirus pandemic could not stop for this moment. It could change the whole structure of human society, causing a breakdown of the belief of freedom and democracy. Thank you very much. much. Thank you for your time and your attention. Thanks. Now, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Ambassador Bazzato. Mr. Bazzato, His Excellency is Ambassador to Sovereign Order of Malta to the Republic of Nauru. He is also a research fellow at CEMAS, Universal Rome, La Sapienza, and European EU Research Center, National Chengchi University, Taipei, Taiwan, ROC. He is also visiting fellow Institute of International Relations, University of Warsaw, Poland. Let's welcome Mr. Ambassador. Are you? Oh yeah, you're welcome now.
Yes.
You are on the.
Can you hear me? I believe that I was hearing you till a moment ago. Okay, very well. So, President Yao, Vice President Tseng, Secretary General Liu, Chairman Mitov, Right Honorable Lord Rogan, honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good day. My presentation is entitled COVID-19, an overview of the actions taken worldwide by the Sovereign Order of Malta. I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation, which will appear on screen, hopefully, in a few moments. Yes. Very well. Sorry, I'm just trying to magnify it. Full screen. Just a second. Sorry. Okay, I know you can see it, but I'm trying to put the full screen. So sorry for the technical difficulty. I will open it again.
You are back into the original picture without PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm just turning the PowerPoint full screen, so it will be more. Yeah, very well.
Yes.
And now, can you see it full screen?
Yes.
Very well. So, you can see the presentation. That's positive, right?
No, we cannot see the logo.
But
Okay.
he's on the screen. No PowerPoint, but you are on screen.
Yeah. Now you will see hopefully.
Yeah.
Share. Can you see
Okay.
it?
We see the PowerPoint right now. Very clear, very nice, very good, very clear pictures right now.
Okay. In this case, I will start my presentation. In order to understand the action, the worldwide action taken by the Sovereign Order of Malta vis-à-vis the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe that is important to understand what the order is and where the order comes from. So the order is a very old member of the international system. It was founded in the 11th century, in 1099, and was recognized as a Catholic order, as a sovereign entity, by Pope Paschal II in 1113. It has a long official name that reflects 9 centuries, more than 9 centuries of history. It is known as the Sovereign, Military, Hospitaller, order of Saint John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta. In a nutshell, it is a lay religious order of the Catholic Church and the subject, as I said, of international law. It is neutral, impartial, and apolitical. And today the order is active in 120 countries, caring for the people in need through its medical, social, and humanitarian works. It starts as a chivalric order of healers and warriors. The first hospital of the order, in fact, was founded in Jerusalem, and since the very beginning, it catered not only to fellow members of the order, or fellow Catholics, but also to people of both faith and ethnicity. After the end of the Crusade kingdoms in the Levant, the order moved to Cyprus, then Rhodes, then in 1530 to the island of Malta, from which it was evicted in 1798 by Napoleon. Now, the seat of the government of the order is in the city of Rome. As I said, sovereign of Malta is subject to international public law. It has managed to retain its international personality over the centuries, and presently it entertains diplomatic relations with 111 states and the European Union. The Sovereign Order of Malta, just like the OEC, has permanent status at the United Nations. The constitutional seats of Rome enjoy excellent utility, so do 133 diplomatic representatives that the order has all over the world. The one on the left is a magistral palace, the other compound is called the magistral building. The order, like the Roman Catholic Trinity, is one and true in the sense of the three identities: the relief agency and 30 volunteer corps, as well as numerous hospitals, medical centers, and specialty foundations worldwide. The order does not pursue any economic or political goal, and is not controlled by the government. Again, the order is sovereign. The order can count on more than 13,500 knights, dames, and chaplains, who are probably members of the order. And next to them stand 8,000 volunteers and 40,000 employees, all of them medical personnel. For the left is portrays some names of the order. On the right, we can see some staff of the clinic that the order operates in Dili, the capital city of Timor-Leste. The order is active in 5 continents, 120 countries, but with people from 4 continents. It starts in Europe, and now it is a global reality. In South Africa, Korea, and Mexico. So, in the face of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic, the order is increasing its engagement, scaling up all its social medical projects. Now you can see one photo of the cover document of the order of Association of Ireland, where our friend Senator Many of the social medical projects where its association with have been scaled up or even converted into projects aimed at preventing and treating COVID-19 infections. Medical and logistic assistance provided to the national system of the countries affected in compliance with government guidelines. This is very important. The order always tries to act to cooperate, coordinate local governments. The diplomatic service of the order exists first and foremost to provide coordination with the governments of countries where the order operates. Also, in countries where the basic hygienic conditions are precarious, awareness campaigns have been implemented and wash stands for water, sanitation, hygiene services have been improved. That also comes from South Sudan. New hospital wards for COVID-19 patients have been opened, and existing hospitals provided by the Malta have been converted into ICU units. Photos from Italy. Also, in many countries, for delivery of food and basic items on a regular basis, as well as offer medical assistance. The order principle act at level. Of course, the order also operates large-scale projects, but we try to make the difference on the ground. Associations, national associations supported by the order's embassies are ready to continue with their routine home visits, ensuring medical assistance is provided to the elderly. And also deploys of the quarantine isolation, which is causing distress and psychological disorders, starting from depression. One order that lady is the order's permanent observer to the United Nations in Geneva, Her Excellency Ambassador Teresa, and she's been active in the WHO in order to promote legal doctors in middle countries to discuss advancements in research. The project is directed in particular to countries where health infrastructure are unprepared and defective. So in the Middle East, Syria, Yemen, and Palestine, the Palestinian territories. In the meantime, at the same time, the order continues its overall effort. Humanitarian Relief Corps, called Malta International, in case emergency of the nation was able to save 21 babies. This is kind of my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention. And since the order is the case of the sovereign entity in our territory, the other being always exercise territorial sovereignty, and the vacancy say, in case other countries at an island to spare, we will consider the offer. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave the floor to the coordinator. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Ambassador Bozzato gave a summary of what the history and structure of the Order of Malta and what they have been done at preventing and treating COVID patients, medical and logistic assistance (PPE) almost to every corner of the world. Just name a few if I remember correctly, including Albania, Hungary, South Africa, Uganda, and several Middle East and countries, and as well as the South America countries, even in the United States, provide some goodwill help. What a tremendous effort of the order, and Malta has contributed to the world needy people. It is impressive and admirable. Now I would like to introduce our next discussant. Congress in Germany is the Federal Parliament, Bundestag, Mr. Honorable Fischer. Mr. Fischer, are you online? And please turn off the PPT, please. Thank you. 你好，你好。
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues.
Yes.
Taiwan is fighting against the COVID-19 strong, hard, and successful. And so I think it's important, Mr. President, you said it, that Taiwan participate in the WHO. And now I will say some words to Germany. COVID-19 attracted public attention in Germany at the beginning of March, when, as a result of an increasing number of tests, the growing spread of the virus became obvious. With 4,888 cases, the 16th of March is declared by the federal government as the day with the highest number of cases. Since the symptoms of the diseases appeared about a week after the infection, it can be assumed that the peak of the infection in Germany was already reached in early March or earlier. The so-called lockdown began on the 23rd of March, means not earlier than 14 days after the peak had been reached, and brought various restrictions with fatal effects in daily life, social contacts, health, and the economic situation of people. I think it's nearly the same as the other countries in Europe. From that day, the number of cases has decreased by about 25% per week. We currently have fewer than 100 new cases in Germany every day. However, more than 300 people are still tested positive for corona every day. In total, almost 200,000 people have been tested positively for corona since March. About 2/3 of them have become ill. Almost 9,000 people died from corona infection. Initially, there was no increased mortality in Germany. However, after the partial closure of the healthcare system for non-corona patients, the number of deaths with causes other than corona has increased since mid-March. In this respect, it seems less the corona infection to be the causes than the measures taken to combat the risk of death. In addition to the deterioration in healthcare, the lockdown stopped state schooling and childcare. All state culture institutions were closed. Contact bans, mask requirements and distance rules, curfew and quarantines were introduced. Personal contacts are increasingly maintained by the state. The diverse private club life is practically closed, and almost all services, with the exception of food retailing, were initially banned. In many respects, the government also aims to create a new normal life. Indeed, intensive work is currently being carried out on an infrastructure for seamless contact monitoring of all citizens. Increased vaccinations are planned. Social contacts, which had been systematically restricted, continue to be partially restricted despite the new manageable risk. Even the freedom of movement within Germany was restricted by reactivating, checking, and controlling of violations of national borders, irrelevant since the end of the imperial era. The individual freedoms are clearly limited. This applies centrally to social contact options. This means the important personal exchange between people, both at home and in private and public institutions. But it also concerns the ban on culture offers, so provisions and services, and the loss of individual, professional, and economic freedoms. In large parts, these are maintained by the state government despite a manageable coronary risk. Also, strong economic upheavals are visible. The curves increasingly judge in the direction of further easing. Unemployment in Baden-Württemberg, it's my home region, rose by more than 30% in May compared to the previous year. The existence of small and medium-sized businesses as Germany's innovation engines is massively endangered in many areas. An economic slump of 8% is expected this year alone. The decision to authorize the government by the German Bundestag was taken at the end of March. At the time, the reason was an alleged impending overload of the healthcare system. Fortunately, this did not occur and was never to be feared at any time later. Germany was even able to provide care for the seriously ill from other European countries. Nevertheless, the restrictions still apply. The German Bundestag could decide to lift it, but this is difficult to imagine with a view to the federal system. In the German federal system, the individual countries have nuances of different configurations, but all follow the above principle to creating a new normal. Government participation by parties opposing the Bundestag secures majorities in the federal parliament. In addition, another law was passed in May, which authorized the federal government to independently change the content of the law in the Authorization Act. As long as the German Bundestag does not withdraw this law, the federal government has both executive and legislative powers. I have already mentioned the personal restrictions and significant state interference in private life. In the media, I have been observing that reports in Germany have largely been into line of one direction for months, not only in public law media, but also in the major television stations and daily newspapers. Government critical reportings about measures against Corona only takes place in a few German newspapers. Austrian and Swiss media, like the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, seem to report more critically. It is significant that the former president of the German Constitutional Protection, Hans-Georg Maaßen, said, "For me, the Neue Zürcher Zeitung is something like Western television," alluding to the situation of the people in the former German Democratic Republic who otherwise only received the government-controlled information. Therefore, some people feel freedom of expression in increasingly restricted in Germany. In Germany, also, it is perceived that Donald Trump is also accusing social media such as Facebook and Twitter of spreading fake news. For example, it is claimed by demonstrants in Germany that censorship takes place officially, partly financed with taxpayers' money from the federal budget. Opinions about the Corona situation that deviate from official government opinions are increasingly defamed as conspiracy theories. The society in Germany is deeply divided between opponents of the government and government supporters. As already described, the right of freedom of cultural life, freedom of religions, freedom of assembly, of association are also being still partially restricted. The longer this lasts, the great and more permanent the social damage will be. I wish you all good health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Fischer. Thank you for your words in here. Mr. Fischer just summarized what the contemporary social, economic, and political environment of Germany under the influence of pandemic. He also lists out all the questions of personal restrictions and state interference in private life, as well as arbitrary deterioration in health care. By the creating of so-called new normal, we will cover the fact of the immediate impact of restricted economic freedom, individual freedom, and of social contact options, human rights, economic freedom, more intervention and restricting, as well as more political constraints. Thank you very much for your speech. Following, I would like to introduce Mr. Mitov. Mitov is former Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria. Mr. Mitov, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss such important topics. I hope everyone hears me. I hope everyone hears me. Thank you very much once again. Wonderful to see friends and to discuss the state of democracy, what waits ahead after the coronavirus crisis. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, I'm really happy to say a few words and participate in this discussion. First, I will say something that we can basically claim with absolute certainty. I think that in such unconventional times, the crisis will not bring anything radically new, but for sure will speed up and boost tendencies which have existed before the crisis started. And one of the most important tendencies which I believe are out there and will be boosted and are already starting to show certain dynamic is the crisis of trust in the international scene. A lot of governments are asking questions about whether information was hidden initially or underestimated by certain countries. How the governments gather and announce statistical data related to the infected and those who died with COVID-19 is another question that we are asking now, and we will be asking in the future. And if intentional manipulation of data gets proven, some countries could find themselves in further isolation long after the main crisis is gone. Or their status in the international institutions could be influenced by such events. Second, the competition for vaccine could lead, unfortunately, to the so-called vaccine nationalism. That is a fear which exists among many. The cure could be used as a geopolitical tool, and that needs to be avoided at all costs. Here, the voice of every organization, every authority is important. Recently, we have also witnessed appalling hacking attacks of the digital infrastructure of hospitals and laboratories, either working on vaccines or dealing with infected people. Such phenomenon needs to be harshly addressed by the national governments and the international organizations. And I would appeal to each and every one of us here to pay attention to that, because malicious digital activities are not restricted only to to rogue hackers, but also sometimes are orchestrated by governments. It is clear that the concept of the domination of an absolute national sovereignty, which stands on top of everything else in international relations, is failing once again historically. We have touched upon this question in some of our previous gatherings, previous discussions, and I want to underline once again this topic, because I believe the crisis has also demonstrated that the contemporary totalitarian regimes, totalitarian and authoritarian regimes, are trying to transform the architecture of the international relations in a way that national sovereignty stands as an absolute value, stands above everything. And then, in the meantime, the human rights, freedom of speech, political pluralism, checks and balances get hidden under the carpet, so to say, and never mentioned when it comes to those totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. That is the ideal world in which authoritarianism and totalitarianism flourishes. The idea that whatever happens inside a nation concerns only that nation is deeply misguided, and we need to make sure to outline and emphasize that, especially in the lines of the coronavirus crisis, because obviously whatever happens in our own nations does not concern only us, concerns each and everyone in this world, having in mind what happened, and having in mind that data might have been hidden from the very beginning, before the outbreak of the crisis, or before we knew about the spread of the virus. Another tendency and another, let's say, big conclusion could be that the freedom of movement of capital not necessarily leads to political and civic freedoms. I mean, that's the paradigm of the world transformation from the beginning of the 90s completely has lost its legitimacy. This phenomenon has been observed and described by lots of scholars until this moment, but democracies and their decision makers, their leaders, did not pay attention adequately on this issue, heavily influenced by significant business interests. Now we see that the attitude towards China and other totalitarian and authoritarian regimes will continue changing. The desire to decrease and diminish the political and the economic dependence of the democratic societies from the totalitarian regimes will probably lead to further withdrawal of investment and withdrawal of production capabilities, relocation, let's say, of production capabilities. The production dependence on China most probably will start to diminish, which means the region could benefit. The different regions could benefit if they act in accord and create the necessary conditions for the companies to move their production capacities elsewhere. The cost of human life, we observe that the cost of human life has increased dramatically and cannot be completely ignored even by the totalitarian and authoritarian governments. Security and safety of the citizens as values will take even higher place in the scale of prioritization for the national governments, but also within the frame of political and military alliances. The people are ready to bear temporary restrictions of their freedoms in the name of public safety, which unfortunately opens up opportunities for certain governments with authoritarian tendencies to take away part of those freedoms and never give them back. The tendencies which started with the terrorist attacks of 2001 gains new dimensions. New technologies will develop in the direction of assuring even better public safety and surveillance. And it is not going to be surprising if the thermal cameras become an inherent part of our lives, as did the metal detectors at the time. The transparency, though, is increasing not only with regards to the citizens, but also with respect to the institutions. Digitalization gives opportunities not only to the governments to control citizens, but also vice versa. Citizens gain instruments and tools in order to control better and check better their institutions, and can demand in the future way more transparency from their governments, from their institutions. Unfortunately, the long quarantine isolation and the economic stagnation could probably lead in some countries to increase of crime rate, primarily because of poverty. The governments which have found instruments to support their small and middle enterprises and to support individually their citizens, thus maintaining their consumption capabilities, will get out of the economic crisis easier and earlier, according to me, because as we know, the capability for consumption is one of the most important is to maintain the chains of production. The expert knowledge will be valued way more by the citizens than until this moment. If the crisis brought us something, it is exactly the idea that in times of in times like this, we need to listen to expertise, to scholars, to researchers, to people who deal with rational, pragmatic, and truthful information. We saw that when the COVID crisis was recognized as a threat to the health and the life of the people, they started listening to the doctors, the virologists, and the economists, and the clairvoyants and the charlatans did not gain much ground. However, as it was already mentioned by the previous speakers, the disinformation campaigns are still going on and becoming even more shameless and dangerous. Democratic governments need to start developing, seriously start developing and implementing way better strategies in the fight against deliberate and hostile disinformation, which quite often is orchestrated by hostile authoritarian and totalitarian governments. Contrary to all the talk, I believe, contrary to all the talk about the dissolution of the global institutions, we might actually observe the opposite tendency. The COVID crisis, of course, demonstrated how interconnected we are and how much we need to coordinate internationally. The borders might have been closed temporarily, but the information flow has not stopped even for a second. There are lots of questions for organizations like the World Health Organization, and for that matter, to the whole UN, but more in the direction of a serious reform rather than dismantlement. Nation states as well and the global institutions for years have arrogantly ignored the danger of a global pandemic. Even if the warnings were there were lots of specialists and scholars who were trying to tell us that viruses mutate, pandemics were part of human history all throughout the existence of civilization. But the investments, the governmental investments, were predominantly in the area of conventional security, missiles, arms, surveillance technologies. Turns out you cannot shoot the virus with the newest C-400 or with Iskanders. The investments need to be redirected, of course, in science and research, well better, rather than anything else. And as a last point, I want to emphasize once again the point that after the crisis, some governments might be tempted not to return the full scale of citizens' rights, maintaining this theme of the endless external threats from which they need to protect the people. And that might be used as a pretext for further backslides to authoritarianism in some countries. We need to be vigilant and vocal about those tendencies and oppose them rigorously. Thank you very much. Once again, it was a pleasure.
Thank you. It's our pleasure too. And let me say, this is a very remarkable and analysis of the epidemic impact on freedom, democracy, and human rights. You also mentioned about the crisis of trust, competition of vaccine, and with the kind of national-oriented attitude and mentality. This is a big issue. Though you can look at it small, but create a lot of ripples. Thank you very much for your word. Now let us welcome our next discussion, Lord Rogan. Rogan, are you online now?
Good morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
I turn the floor to you.
Good morning, Europe, and good afternoon, Asia. It's a joy to be with our colleagues here in Europe and our friends in Asia, albeit in a virtual mode. I must apologize for Mr. William Humphreys' non-attendance. William is Secretary General of the UK chapter, but he's also a working politician, and during the lockdown, he in fact is able to work, and he has a constituency problem this today, which necessitates him not being here. However, William does send you all his best regards. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an immense pleasure to be invited to speak to you today, and of course to hear contributions from my WLFD colleagues and others. The title of today's forum is COVID-19 and its impact on freedom, democracy, and human rights. And the impact of all these three on these areas of life in the United Kingdom, as elsewhere around the world, has been really immense. In common with most other countries, most other members of the House of Lords, I've lived for many years on this world. But I can say without hesitation, I've seen nothing to compare with the restrictions the pandemic has placed on our daily lives. The first confirmed cases of coronavirus in the UK were in January, when 2 Chinese tourists tested positive after becoming ill whilst visiting the city of York. The first UK transmissions of the disease followed in February, but formal restrictions on movement were not introduced inside our borders until the following month. On the 20th of March, Prime Minister Boris Johnson ordered all bars, cafes and restaurants and gyms to close. This announcement came with a commitment that the UK taxpayer would pay 80% of the wages cost of workers temporarily sent home or furloughed by employers hit by crisis. And as Daniel Mithoff has said, measures such as this will help economic recovery in the long run. 3 days later, Mr. Johnson announced a nationwide lockdown, effectively compelling the public to stay at home and only leave to purchase food and medicines or go for limited exercise while maintaining social distance. 1.5 million people, regarded as the most likely to require hospital treatment if they contracted the disease, were also told not to leave their homes for at least 12 weeks. That 12-week period ended yesterday, although some of those in the so-called shielded category can now go out while staying 2 meters apart from others. Since the outbreak began, more than 290,000 people in the United Kingdom have tested positive for COVID-19. And sadly, over 41,000 persons have lost their lives. As one would expect in a healthy democracy such as the United Kingdom, there is much open debate about the rights and wrongs of the government's approach to dealing with the pandemic. One of the most contentious topics surrounds the availability of personal protection equipment for NHS workers and the urgency in tackling the spread of the virus in care homes and how and when to safely reopen schools. In the early stages of lockdown, the United Kingdom government talked about wishing to pursue a 4-nation approach to tackling coronavirus, with the devolved administrations in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales invited to follow the lead of Boris Johnson and the UK Chief Medical and Scientific Officers. As time passed, the different governments have gone their own way on some aspects of the lockdown, particularly in relation to the reopening of schools. Schools here in Belfast and elsewhere in Northern Ireland are not due to open until August, and some even in the month of September, whilst Scottish schools are opening sooner. Meanwhile, schools in Wales are due to open at the end of June, while those in England are already taking limited numbers of pupils. Ministers in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, in common with their UK counterparts in London, regularly claim to be guided by the science. But final decisions are made by the elected politicians, who will be judged on these at the ballot box. It is democracy in action. As a committed unionist, I am strongly of the view that the United Kingdom government, led by Mr. Johnson, who also holds the title of Minister for the Union, must continue to take an active role in what is happening across the entire United Kingdom. In recent weeks, during virtual sittings in the House of Lords, I've asked UK ministers to ensure that dentists in all our 4 nations have access to sufficient quantities of personal protection equipment before reopening to patients. I've also encouraged the Prime Minister himself to do what he can to assist Northern Ireland schools with the process of reopening. And whilst democracy goes on, there can be no doubt that the ongoing lockdown restrictions, while not being diluted, will curb our freedom and human rights for some time to come. For instance, if a citizen of the United Kingdom visits a foreign country and returns home, or a European foreign citizen enters the United Kingdom, all must inform the authorities at the point of entry where they will self-isolate for 14 days. And the police have right to visit these premises to confirm that the isolation is being observed. And if not, a fine can be issued. But these are the price we must pay, not only to safeguard our own health, but to protect the well-being of our families, friends, and fellow UK citizens. But if I can give you good news, literally just this morning, the Northern Ireland Executive have announced that all retail shops and supermarkets can now open. These are the first in the United Kingdom. Colleagues, before I conclude in my capacity as President of the WFD UK chapter, I want to say a few brief words about China's recent behaviour. I read with concern this week that Chinese fighters' jet had illegally entered Taiwanese airspace, promoting the Taiwanese Air Force to issue verbal warnings and then to scramble its own jets to drive the invaders away. This followed last month's warning from the chief of the Chinese Joint Staff Department, who said, and I quote, "We warn Taiwanese pro-independence and separatist forces sternly. The path of Taiwanese independence leads to a dead end. Any challenge to this law will be severely punished." And in recent weeks, the world has watched in horror as China has sought to impose illegitimate will on the people of Hong Kong through new security legislation. As we know, the 1997 agreement, under which the United Kingdom relinquished control of Hong Kong, required Beijing to protect cherished freedoms, including the freedom of assembly and speech, an independent judiciary, and other rights that we, as Democrats, are very familiar with. It comes as no surprise to any of us that China has again chosen to behave in such a reckless, self-serving manner. But that does not make its words and deeds any more palatable. I welcome the strong opposition of democratic governments around the world to Beijing's continued hostility. Let the message go out from this gathering today that China's perverse interpretation of freedom, democracy, and human rights will never match our own. We will never bend the knee to their acts of aggression, and we will always stand by our friends. God bless you and thank you.
We thank you very much for your and treasure your friendship and support for Taiwan. Really, we appreciate that. Lord Logan just make a briefing regarding all the different restrictions in Great Britain, such as the close of bars, cafes, restaurants, gyms, closing school, furlough holiday or stay at home, and a national lockdown for 12 weeks, etc. They will curb freedom and human rights for some time to come, but their price must be paid, not only to safeguard our own health, but to protect the well-being for our family friends. Thank you very much for your point. Now let's introduce Mr. Wilson, Senator Wilson from Wales, from Ireland.
Good morning and good evening from a very wet and windy Cavan here in the Republic of Ireland. And good morning to all of my colleagues. I'm greatly honoured and pleased to join you all in this stimulating and timely discussion of how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted our respective democracies and our democratic freedoms. I want to join my colleagues in extending my deepest thanks to you, Mr. Moderator, to our esteemed World League for Freedom and Democracy President Yao and Vice President, and to the many behind the scenes who have put together this great event this morning, particularly Louisa. Before I commence, I would like to pay tribute to the Taiwanese community here in Ireland for their very generous donation of PPE equipment to 3 nursing homes here in my own home county of Cavan. And I know that through their fundraising efforts, they have been able to distribute much needed PPE equipment to many nursing homes throughout the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland. And I want to pay tribute to them, to their chairman of the Taiwanese Irish Friendship Society, Dr. Angela, to Mr. Pierre Yang, who is the Taiwanese representative here in the Republic, to James Brew in his office, and to Anne Patricia Poway in the office as well, and to thank them again and to do so publicly here this morning for their very generous contributions. Mr. Moderator, I come to today's video event in a rather unusual circumstances. On April the 3rd last, I was greatly honoured to be re-elected to the Irish Senate, Seanad Éireann, for my 5th consecutive term. And though I was re-elected 10 weeks ago this very day, I have yet to take my seat in the Senate. And as I address you here today, I cannot say with any certainty or assurance when I and my fellow senators will be able to take our seats. Indeed, a number of my fellow senators are currently asking the courts to instruct the Taoiseach, which is our Prime Minister, to convene the 26th Seanad. And this is not an indication of a very healthy democracy. The reasons why the Seanad is not sitting are complex, and I do not wish to take up too much of your time going into them in detail. Suffice to say that the general election for the lower house of Parliament, Dáil Éireann, delivered a highly divisive result, with the 3 main parties each receiving just under a quarter of the vote. We now have a Parliament which cannot elect a new government, which in turn means that we have a lame duck administration and Prime Minister who cannot appoint the 11 other members of the Seanad as provided for under the Irish Constitution. The outgoing Attorney General has advised the Taoiseach that the Seanad cannot sit without the 11 additional nominees. And though there is a range of senior legal opinion which disagrees with this, that is the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. Therefore, the Irish Seanad, which is the upper house, has not been convened, and legislation cannot be passed, as it must pass through both the lower and upper house to become law. So this is the catch-22 situation which faces the Republic of Ireland. COVID-19 is complicating and delaying the negotiations for a new government, which has delayed the convening of a chamber of Parliament. but at precisely the moment when we need stable government, with strong parliamentary oversight to deliver and monitor an effective pandemic response, COVID-19 is also delaying its delivery. We are dealing well with COVID-19 in the Republic, and I will speak in more detail shortly about how it is affecting us here. But the parliamentary oversight of the response has been far from satisfactory. Indeed, many of my parliamentary colleagues in the Dáil, which is the lower chamber, are unhappy with their role in parliamentary oversight. A combination of social distancing and some very conservative legal advice, which says the use of video conferencing systems such as this one are not allowable under our constitution, has effectively reduced the Parliament, the lower house, from a place of 160 deputies to one which can only accommodate a maximum of 50. So 110 deputies are effectively being told each day that they are surplus to requirement and are not needed in the chamber or even in the building. Questioning of the current team of caretaker ministers, these are outgoing ministers from the defeated government continuing in post until their successors can be appointed, is minimalist. Parliamentary proceedings are reduced to exchanges of prepared remarks with little interaction or spontaneity. As proponents of open democracy and democratic accountability, we all know that the hard questions from politicians, from experts and from journalists are critically important in challenging gaps in the government delivery. Democracy is not just about the democratic process of voting and counting votes fairly. It is also about scrutiny and accountability conducted openly and freely for all to see. To be fair, I am satisfied and reassured that a government will eventually be formed here, possibly in the coming 3 to 4 weeks, and we will soon see the return of democratic checks and balances which have made Ireland one of the longest and most secure continuous democracies in the world. But I also see that COVID-19 has exposed some weaknesses in our democratic process. This pandemic has served as a reminder that democracy is not an end, it is a continuing and evolving process. The idea that you have finished the work of securing your democracy is a myth. Indeed, it is a dangerous myth. The threats to our democracies are constant and come from a variety of sources, agents and actors, external and internal, as some of my colleagues have already alluded to. Perhaps the great internal threat is complacency. The notion that any democracy is so perfect and so secure that it does not require constant work and attention to ensure its continuance. We see this with the rise of social media, which has already been mentioned. We have seen through the nexus of social media, fake news and COVID-19 misinformation, how false and deliberately misleading information has caused damage and panic. At precisely the moment when people were looking most to their governments and statutory agencies for clear guidance, honest information and solid leadership, we also saw a range of misinformation and disinformation from lying and misguided sources circulated to undermine trust in government. Some governments have responded, or should I more correctly say overreacted, to this real threat by engaging in anti-democratic behaviours, trying to shut down legitimate debate and comment. When this crisis has passed, we should carefully study and analyse the range of responses from governments across the globe, particularly across the European Union. The study should, of course, look at the range of government policies, responses to the pandemic itself, and how they move to safeguard public health, but it should also look at them via some filters. Which governments used the pandemic to make power grabs and pull power and authority back to the centre? Which governments sought to control all information and minimise public accountability and scrutiny? Which governments used the crisis to secure their own political support and tried to use a natural rally around the flag public sentiment to bolster the political support of the ruling party? Which governments sought to reach out to the opposition parties to build a consensus approach? And which governments welcomed, engaged and sought greater scrutiny and public debate on their state's pandemic response? It is only when this crisis has passed that we will be able to get the required detail of national data accurately that is collated on a fair and equal basis, which allows for better direct comparisons. I mentioned this last point as I think comparisons already been made which do not take account of a range of factors, not least the reality that individual countries are producing sets of COVID-19 data for mortality and virus spread, which are accurate on a country by country basis, but differ in how they are individually constructed. For example, here in Ireland, our daily figures include all deaths in all settings. I think this is also the case in Belgium. But I understand, and Lord Rogan maybe could clarify this, that the daily totals in countries such as France and the United Kingdom are based on different criteria. There are also issues regarding how the data is less reflective of differences in public policy responses and simply highlights how some countries had different vulnerabilities. Take the situation on the island of Ireland. We have two jurisdictions, Northern Ireland and the Republic. The mortality rate in Northern Ireland, it is my understanding, is higher than in the Republic. The mortality rate in Northern Ireland is also well below that in Great Britain, particularly England. Is this fact attributable solely to the differing public health responses and public approaches, or are there other factors? Though my colleague Lord Rogan can speak better to this matter than I, my understanding is that Northern Ireland's population was potentially more vulnerable to COVID-19 in terms of two significant structural characteristics. With 136 persons per square kilometre, Northern Ireland has a higher population density than the Republic, which is 71 persons per square kilometre. A higher density makes rapid spread of the virus more likely because social distancing is harder. Northern Ireland also has a higher share of over 65, almost 50% in Northern Ireland and just under 12% in the Republic. These factors could explain some of the statistical gaps. I mentioned my distinguished colleague from Northern Ireland, Lord Denis Rogan. I want to pay tribute to him and his colleagues for the solid level of cooperation which there has been between the Irish government and the Northern Ireland executive. As a member of the Seanad, I want to set out my own regret that the cooperation has not always been as strong as it should have been. I particularly wish to add that I personally think it was a mistake of our Prime Minister not to consult and inform the Northern Ireland executive in advance of his major announcements on moving into and then out of lockdown restrictions. It is something that should not have been allowed to happen. I think the Irish government now accepts this, but it is an error that must not be repeated by any future Irish governments, particularly governments seeking my support. Let me conclude by commenting briefly on the COVID-19 situation, again here in the Republic. Over the past 3 months, the COVID-19 pandemic has claimed the lives of around 2,200 people on the island of Ireland. My thoughts and prayers are with their families and friends. The progress of the disease in Ireland has been severe and in some areas worse than other areas. My own particular county here is one of the areas that has been most affected on the island. Approximately 1,000 beds in our public acute hospital systems are empty, and 50% of the capacity of private hospitals has been taken temporarily over by the state. We still have roughly 1 million people on some form of state support for their income. We have thousands of businesses and entire industries who do not know what they are facing into. Right now, our national focus must be on having a substantive discussion about where Ireland goes from here and how quickly we can move to restore as much normality as possible. But we also need to understand the evidence of serious mental health and psychosocial problems emerging in many countries. The World Bank and the OECD have both also outlined evidence of a profound gender basis for this issue, with women carrying a much heavier economic and social burden. The spirit of being in this together can only be protected if we get everyone back on the same agenda. While we cannot be guided only by practice in other countries, it falls to our government to explain when the policies we are pursuing differ significantly from those in place in other countries. We need full transparency. We need our government to give all of the details behind its decisions, and we needed to understand that the only way of retaining public support for restrictions is to be far more open about the exact basis for the choices which we are making. Again, thank you very much for your invitation, and thank my other colleagues for their contributions, and I look forward to the remaining contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And Senator Wilson analyzed what the current catch-22 political problem and the rich pandemic influence happened in the Ireland Republic. What I do agree, and I cannot agree more, is Senator emphasized democracy is not just about democratic process of voting, but accountability conducted openly. The pandemic has also served as a reminder that democracy is not an end, but a continuing and evolving process. What's more, Senator suggests us take a close look about the government, not least to take this opportunity to make power grabs, to control information, to rally around the flag to bolster the ruling party, and how quickly we can move to restore as much as normality as possible. This is the question. Thank you so much. Now I would like to turn the floor to Professor Stefano Bellaggi. Thank you, Professor Bellaggi. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me today here with you. It's a really big pleasure to be part again of the World League for Freedom and Democracy conference, and it's really nice to see all our friends and the organizer, even from a virtual perspective. So similarly to what happened in other Western countries, the response to the COVID-19 emergency in Italy was very slow. I am sure you are well aware that our country has been one of the most affected country by the virus. It has been more or less the first Western country severely hit, and this could be the responsibility of some delay, some bad decision, somebody say bad luck of how the virus has propagated. The extent of the virus was really not understood at the beginning. The main action at the beginning were mostly aimed to contain the possible infection, mainly from People's Republic of China. And I think this is the first lesson we will learn from the virus. All our efforts were aimed to close the borders. And one of the very first action that the government took was a ban to the flight from the People's Republic of China, from Hong Kong, and from Taiwan. I'm sad to say that Italy has been the only Western country which have had and still has a ban on all flights from Taiwan. And this happened in a very weird way. So nobody knew what to do. They just put the flight from Taiwan inside the ban. And me, myself, and a lot of politicians who have been close friends with Taiwan try to reverse this decision. And the very good news is Taiwan really hit the spotlight in those weeks. Everybody explained the obvious difference between Taiwan and People's Republic of China, a difference which is sometimes not really well known to the public opinion of a European country. The decision has not been reversed, but has been somehow a positive, has had a positive impact on the public opinion towards Taiwan. The decision to ban the flight was, of course, not successful. We thought that the virus was something which could have been brought from China, couldn't be brought from some other country, but the virus was already with us. So we learned this lesson of the virus, which is something that cannot be stopped at the border, that Italians or Chinese were resident in Italy were coming in Italy anyway. They were not coming with direct flight, but they were coming through other European or through other country. So this is something which the Pacific region knows well, how the virus knows no border, but we learn that we learn this during these days. Another very important thing is the response, the public opinion and the politics response to the virus. So in the very first week, as I say, we were the first country severely hit by the virus in Europe. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what measure to take. There was this tendency, there was this push towards finding a man, finding a man who could solve everything, finding the right man who could do everything. So turning somehow in some kind of authoritarian state, giving up our freedom in exchange for a solution. All our democratic institution and process were somehow seen as an obstacle for solving a problem. So this has not been the main framework, but it was a really strong tendency. So everybody was saying we do need action in one direction, and the example that was taken was still again the People's Republic of China. We've been following more or less the same procedures with a very strong lockdown in the entire national territories. But after a few days, I would say after 2 weeks, the debate started. And even if there was some kind of a state of emergency, so the parliamentary work were not going on, everybody was connecting through the webcam, there was not a real debate on the action to take. In some way, the conversation, the democratic process started to fuel the action of the government, and I do think that this has been a real positive fact. Another point was the disconnection between the center and the periphery. Italy is somehow a federal state, so the region which we can define the Italian region as the Taiwanese province are very, very important, and they do manage autonomously a lot of things, including the sanitary system. So there's this disconnection between the center and the periphery has played a very important role. Some region has took the right decision, some other region probably didn't took the other a very wise decision. There's been a push from the central government, but really I do think that this is another very important thing. Nobody has forced, nobody has banned the law. this regional, this federal law in order to have only one direction and only one action. We have been put even in a very awkward position. So the media were communicating sometime through Facebook, sometime through social media in a very unconventional way, and this has been hardly strongly criticized by the public opinion. So something which was not really connected to the usually democratic procedures happened, but I think that at the end, the public debate and the public opinion has really brought things in the way that they should have been always treated. The President of the Republic, which in Italy is not a political figure, is more seen as a super partes institutional figures, has played a big role in keeping a balance between the need of taking urgent decision and the need of a democratic representative inside each of those decisions. In general, I would say that the state of emergency has seriously undermined the democratic structure. There have been many times when the need to speak with one voice has prevailed over the normal functioning of the representative democracy. However, I do think that on each of these issues, both the public opinion and the institution have discussed. So each of these moments has been allied and framed within an exceptional context. So to make a synthesis, I would say that we experience a really tough and unprecedented time. Some of the decisions took in those times were not really connected to the political and representative procedures that we were used to. All those actions has been framed in an exceptional context. We have been even facing unprecedented challenge. All our university, all our institution went online. We were not ready. Still, in these days, we are hearing about how the software that we are using here now, and that, for example, my university is using Zoom, is somehow managed and has had some issue regarding the People's Republic of China. So we were not ready, even with the infrastructure. So I think that this pandemic even learned us to be democratic in a time of exceptional challenge. It learned us to give some unity through a time of emergency. It was a long time that the country has not been reunited under the same umbrella. And so especially for the first weeks, I think you probably saw some video over the media, over the internet. Really, the country felt together as one in facing this emergency. So I think that overall, this emergency has been a terrible loss for all the people who lost their sibling, their parents during those months, but it's been an exceptional occasion that proved the real strong roots of our democratic institution, and even showed the roots of the love for our nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Belagi. Belagi, right? The right pronounced Belagi. Okay, thank you so much for your guidance. Anyway, Mr. Belagi, Professor Belagi briefed about what response to the COVID-19 in Italy and indicated that the reason for unsuccessful in the beginning period attribute to the culpable delays and bad decision by the local and federal government. Italian initial major concern and fears were possible economic loss and government mismanagement. In order to contain the epidemic, the government chosen to adopt a total lockdown for the whole country. Quarantine was implemented in individual homes, even without a medical check. Everyone was told to stay at home and wait for 2 weeks. The state of emergency has seriously undermined the democratic structure, and for the sake of the epidemic threat, people was forced to subject to accept them, but it won't prevail. Again, Ms. Bellaggi, Professor, we appreciate your support and your efforts. Thank you so much. And are there any questions from all of you?
Could I make a suggestion, please?
Yes, please. You're on.
First of all, I think I'd like to thank the Secretariat for organizing this. It's been a super idea and very valuable and informative. But the world, as you know it, may well change, and how parliaments and how populations react to this change will need our attention. And could I suggest that the WLFD Secretariat convene a further Zoom in, say, 6 months' time, so that we can review the situation and have collective thoughts on the matter?
Thank you very much for your question. We do hope that the difficult time of the pandemic will be over soon, and we will be back to our regular format for the kind of forum, how organized forum. And our secretary worked very hard. Thank you for your compliment. Any other question? If not, I would like to raise a question regarding the dilemma of interrelationships among the issue of human rights, revitalization of economy, or the containment of coronavirus. Which one comes to priority in your mind? Mr. Wilson? How do you see that? How do you think about the question? You want a question again? Did you hear clearly? Could I repeat?
Repeat the question.
Oh, yeah. Regarding the dilemma of interrelationship among the issues of human rights, revitalization of economy, or the containment of coronavirus, which one comes first? Which one is more important? Put on the priority list one. Question again. Regarding the dilemma of interrelationship among the issue of human rights, revitalization of economy, and the containment of coronavirus, which one comes first? Should be dealt first? It sounds like we have a bad connection. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what do you say?
Is the question for me? I'm sorry.
Yes, would you answer on the?
Well, I think it's a little bit tough question. We all experienced that in the very first day when the emergency was spreading. The main concern was the containment and the saving people. Everybody was really worried of what was going on. In Italy, there's been a very first phase where most of the administrator, most of the politicians were urging not to take this virus too serious. They were afraid of a possible economic downfall. So there was this promotion of going out. getting a drink, going back into the shop, going in the street, not to be scared of the virus. Well, this has been, nobody really knew the dimension of this pandemic at that time, but this has been highlighted from so many scholars, journalists, as one of the main causes. So from that moment on, everybody has took a very slow step in reopening, in putting importance to the economic aspect. We have been affected as the first country from the Western world, so we are now seeing all the consequences. Still, the restaurants are not fully operating. They are operating, but more or less half of the seats are available. And a lot of activities have suffered a really huge impact from the crisis. Our economy was somehow weak before the virus, and everybody is...
Professor, sorry to cut you off. We have another gentleman who wants to say a few words. I really addressing the issue. Sorry for that. Mr. Bozzato, Ambassador Bozzato, I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, but I'd like to have Stefano completing his comments. After that, I will be really glad to add mine.
Oh, no, yeah. I was completing, meaning that I think that all this should be put together, and the needs of the public opinion sometimes go in one direction on the other, and I think that the main democratic framework should always stay stable, because otherwise we will lost a lot of our institutional representation, and yeah, so this is it.
Thank you very much. Time is almost 6 o'clock. Wasting right, the time passed so quickly. The 2-hour online video forum is closing to an end. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your time. Wish to see you very soon. And now with Mr. President
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
很认真的。
See you next time.
See you next time.
Next time indeed. Cheers.